In the hallowed halls of justice, every day brings a new story of conflict and resolution. But on October 27, 2024, in the Oakwood County Courthouse, the scales of justice weren't just balanced, they were shattered. The case on the docket was a simple eviction dispute, a minor footnote in a judge's long career. But what happened next would unleash a secret kept for 50 years, exposing a web of deceit at the heart of a billionaire empire. A pregnant woman fighting for a few $100s was about to find out her entire life was a lie. And the judge, a man who thought he'd seen everything, was about to be the most stunned person in the room. This isn't fiction. It's a story of how one legal document changed everything. The air in courtroom 4B of the Oakwood County Courthouse was thick with the mundane perfume of civil law, old paper, stale coffee, and the faint, anxious sweat of ordinary people in extraordinary trouble. Presiding over it all was the Honorable Judge Arthur Finch. At 62, with a mane of silver hair and a face etched with the gravity of 1,000 verdicts, Judge Finch was a bastion of predictability. His robes were immaculate, his gaze was level, and his patience, while legendary, was not infinite. His morning was a parade of life's small-scale tragedies. A dispute over a fence line, a contested catering bill. And now, the final case before lunch, Hayes vs. Peterson Properties. A young woman, Amelia Hayes, stood at the plaintiff's podium. She was maybe 25, with kind, worried eyes and a cascade of simple brown hair. Her hands rested protectively on her visibly pregnant belly, a silent testament to the stakes of her small claim. Beside her sat her husband Liam, a broad-shouldered man with calloused hands and a look of fierce, if helpless, devotion. He was a carpenter. His flannel shirt and work boots seemed out of place against the courtroom's polished mahogany. They were suing their landlord, a slick, dismissive man named Gerald Peterson, for an illegally withheld security deposit. $800. To the court it was a pittance. To the Hayes family, with a baby on the way, it was the difference between a new crib and mounting debt. Mrs. Hayes, Judge Finch began, his voice a low, even baritone that filled the room. Please summarize your claim for the court. Amelia took a shaky breath. Your Honor, we moved out of 12B Miller Street on September 30th. We have photos assigned move-out checklist from the building supervisor. Mr. Peterson is claiming we caused damage to the hardwood floors, but the damage was there when we moved in. It was noted on the initial inspection. Judge Finch turned his gaze to Mr. Peterson, who scoffed. Your Honor, they had a dog. A big one. The lease clearly stated, no pets. The floor is ruined. The $800 barely covers the sanding. It was a classic, he said, she said. Judge Finch had presided over this exact scenario 100 times. He was about to ask for the initial inspection report when the heavy oak doors at the back of the courtroom swung open with a resounding thud. All heads turned. Two men and a woman, all dressed in exquisitely tailored suits that cost more than the Hayes' car strode in. They moved with an aura of untouchable power and immense wealth, their leather shoes echoing on the marble floor. They weren't lawyers from around Oakwood County. They radiated the cutthroat energy of a downtown Manhattan firm. The lead lawyer, a man with a hawkish face and piercing blue eyes, carried a gold-embossed briefcase. He approached the bailiff, whispered something, and handed over a card. The bailiff, looking flustered, walked to Judge Finch's bench and passed him the card and a folded document. Judge Finch put on his reading glasses. The card was heavy cream-colored stock. Alistair Cromwell, senior partner. Sterling and Cromwell, LLP. Below it, in smaller print, counsel for the estate of Marcus Thorne. Judge Finch's eyebrows shot up. Marcus Thorne. The reclusive titan of industry, billionaire. His death a week ago had been front-page news. A corporate phantom who had built a global tech and logistics empire, Thorne Industries, from nothing. He was childless, unmarried, and his estate was estimated to be worth north of $50 billion. The vultures were already circling with his estranged relatives, preparing for the legal war of the century. Mr. Cromwell, Judge Finch said, his voice laced with a new and unexpected authority. This is a closed session for a civil matter. You are interrupting. Alistair Cromwell gave a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "My apologies, Your Honor, but our business is with a party currently in your courtroom. It is a matter of extreme time-sensitive urgency that pertains to the probate of one of the largest estates in this nation's history." He gestured dismissively towards the plaintiff's table. "It concerns her, Amelia Hayes." A collective gasp rippled through the small courtroom. Amelia and Liam looked at each other, their faces masks of pure confusion. Amelia shook her head slightly as if to say, "It's a mistake." Mr. Peterson, the landlord, looked incensed. "Your Honor, this is a tactic to delay paying what they owe." Judge Finch silenced him with a glare. He looked down at the document. It was a formal petition, a motion to be heard. His eyes scanned the legal jargon and his blood ran cold. He read it again to be sure. "Mr. Cromwell," the judge said slowly, removing his glasses and rubbing the bridge of his nose, "this motion claims that the proceedings of the Thorne estate probate are directly and materially impacted by Mrs. Hayes. Can you explain why the disposition of a $50 billion estate has any bearing on an $800 security deposit dispute?" Cromwell's smirk widened. Behind him, a stern-looking man and woman, clearly members of the Thorne family, watched Amelia with open contempt. "With pleasure, Your Honor," Cromwell said, his voice dripping with condescending theatricality. "It is our position as representatives of the primary beneficiaries, Mr. Cyrus Thorne and Ms. Beatrice Thorne, that the last will and testament of Marcus Thorne is the product of either profound delusion or outright fraud. And this woman," he said, pointing a perfectly manicured finger at Amelia, "is the linchpin of that fraud." Judge Finch felt a knot tighten in his stomach. He had a feeling his quiet Friday was over. He banged his gavel once the sound cracking through the tension. "The case of Hayes versus Peterson Properties is hereby suspended," he declared. "Mr. Cromwell, you have the court's undivided attention. Proceed." Amelia Hayes sank into her chair, one hand on her belly, the other gripping her husband's arm like a lifeline. She had walked into court hoping for $800. She was now at the center of a storm she couldn't possibly comprehend facing the legal might of a dynasty, and she had no idea why. The small civil courtroom designed for minor disputes suddenly felt like the stage for an epic drama. Judge Finch, sensing the gravity, ordered a 10-minute recess to allow the press and public, who were already getting wind of the commotion, to be cleared. He wanted no circus. When they resumed, the only people present were the essential parties, a bewildered Amelia and Liam Hayes, the formidable legal team of Sterling and Cromwell, their clients Cyrus and Beatrice Thorne, and one other man who had entered silently and taken a seat at the back. He was elderly, with a kind face and a well-worn but respectable suit, and he clutched a simple leather briefcase. "Mr. Cromwell, you have made an extraordinary claim." Judge Finch began, his voice resonating with judicial authority. "You allege fraud. The burden of proof is on you. Please enlighten us." Alistair Cromwell took center stage. "Your Honor, as you know, Marcus Thorne passed away 7 days ago. He was a brilliant but eccentric man. In his later years, his isolation deepened. He had no wife, no children, and his only living relatives are his sister, my client, Ms. Beatrice Thorne," he gestured to the severe-looking woman, "and his nephew, Mr. Cyrus Thorne." He indicated the sharp-suited younger man who looked ready to devour the world. For years they were his only family, his designated heirs. Cyrus Thorne nodded grimly, a picture of aggrieved entitlement. "Yesterday," Cromwell continued, "we were presented with what purports to be Mr. Thorne's final will, executed just 1 month ago. It was filed by his longtime personal attorney and executor, Mr. Elias Vance." Cromwell pointed towards the quiet man at the back of the courtroom. "A will that in one fell swoop disinherits his entire family. It liquidates his holdings, dissolves his charitable foundations, and leaves his entire fortune, every stock, every property, every last dollar of his $50 billion empire, to a single sole beneficiary." Cromwell paused for dramatic effect, letting the weight of his words settle. He then turned and fixed his piercing gaze on Amelia. It leaves everything to a complete stranger. A waitress at a diner in Oakwood County. A woman he has never met, never spoken to, never had any connection with whatsoever. It names her Amelia Hayes. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. It was so quiet Judge Finch could hear the faint hum of the fluorescent lights above. Amelia's face had gone ghostly pale. Liam's arm was wrapped around her, his expression a mixture of fear and disbelief. "Fraud," Beatrice Thorne muttered from her seat, her voice like grinding glass. "The girl is a grifter." "Order!" Judge Finch commanded, his eyes flashing. He looked at Amelia, who seemed to shrink under the accusation. He had seen her file. She worked part-time at the Morning Glory Diner. Her husband was a self-employed carpenter. Their joint bank account had a balance of $1,247. The idea of her orchestrating a multi-billion-dollar fraud was on its face absurd. "Mr. Cromwell, these are accusations. Where is this will?" the judge demanded. "Mr. Vance has it," Cromwell said with a sneer. "We have filed an immediate injunction to contest its validity on the grounds of undue influence and lack of testamentary capacity. Marcus was unwell. This woman, or someone acting on her behalf, clearly took advantage of a sick, elderly man." Judge Finch's eyes fell upon the old man at the back. "Mr. Elias Vance, please approach the bench." Elias Vance walked forward with a slow, deliberate gait. He was the antithesis of Alistair Cromwell. Where Cromwell was a shark, Vance was a tortoise, ancient, steady, and carrying the weight of a lifetime of secrets on his back. He placed his worn briefcase on the plaintiff's table next to Amelia and gave her a small, reassuring nod. "Your Honor," Vance said, his voice surprisingly firm and clear, "I was Marcus Thorne's personal attorney and friend for 45 years. I can attest under oath that when he signed this will 1 month ago, he was of perfectly sound mind and body. He was sharp, lucid, and more determined than I had ever seen him." "Then explain this madness," Cyrus Thorne burst out, unable to contain himself. "Explain why he would give the legacy my family helped build to a nobody." "I am not here to explain his reasons, Mr. Thorne," Vance replied calmly. "I am here to execute his final wishes. That is my fiduciary duty." He opened his briefcase and removed a thick document bound in a simple blue cover. "This is the last will and testament of Marcus Thorne, certified, notarized, and legally unimpeachable." He handed it to the bailiff, who passed it to Judge Finch. The judge read the first page, his expression unreadable. Then he looked up, his gaze sweeping over the expectant faces. "Mr. Vance, for the record, would you please read the dispositive provision, Article 4, Section A." Elias Vance cleared his throat and took a copy from his briefcase. His voice filled the silent room, each word landing like a hammer blow. "I, Marcus Thorne, being of sound mind and memory, do hereby declare this to be my last will and testament. Under Article 4, Section A, concerning the disposition of my entire estate, both real and personal, I bequeath everything without condition or reservation to one person, Amelia Rose Hayes, currently residing at 12B Miller Street, Oakwood County. If the aforementioned Amelia Rose Hayes should predecease me, the entire estate shall pass to her issue per stirps." He paused, then looked directly at Amelia's pregnant belly. "The term issue refers to her children, Your Honor." Amelia let out a small strangled gasp. It wasn't just her. The baby she was carrying was now technically the heir to Thorne Industries. Liam Hayes, the carpenter, looked like he was about to faint. He stared at his wife, not with suspicion, but with utter soul-shaking confusion. Who was she? Judge Arthur Finch leaned back in his high-backed chair, the will resting in his hands. He had seen shocking twists, family betrayals, and surprise inheritances over his 30 years on the bench. But this was different. A $50 billion fortune handed to a pregnant waitress in his courtroom who was moments ago fighting over an $800 deposit. He looked at the Thorne family, their faces contorted with rage and disbelief. He looked at their high-priced lawyer already plotting his next attack. He looked at the steadfast, loyal face of Elias Vance. And finally he looked at Amelia Hayes, who was openly weeping now, not with joy, but with the terrifying, crushing weight of a world that no longer made any sense. The judge's mind was reeling. Cromwell was right about one thing. It was either an elaborate fraud or the act of a madman. But as he looked at Elias Vance, he saw a third possibility, one far more remote and far more profound, that it was all true, and that there was a reason so powerful that a man like Marcus Thorne would upend his entire legacy for a woman he'd apparently never met. "Mr. Vance," Judge Finch said, his voice barely a whisper, "does this will offer any explanation?" Elias Vance met his gaze. "No, Your Honor. The will does not, but Marcus left something else, something that does." The courtroom had become a pressure cooker. Alistair Cromwell, sensing he was losing the narrative, immediately went on the offensive. "Your Honor, this is preposterous. Mr. Vance speaks of explanations, but the document itself is proof of delusion. We demand that Mrs. Hayes be put on the stand. Let's hear from her own mouth how she manipulated a vulnerable billionaire." Judge Finch considered it. It was procedurally irregular, but the situation was beyond anything the court's rulebook had anticipated. "Mrs. Hayes," he said gently, "you are not under any obligation, but would you be willing to answer a few questions?" Amelia, wiping tears from her face, nodded numbly. Liam squeezed her hand, whispering, "It's okay. Just tell the truth." She walked to the witness stand, a lone, fragile figure in the eye of a hurricane. Cromwell circled her like a predator. "Mrs. Hayes, please state your full name for the record." "Amelia Rose Hayes." "And what is your occupation?" I was a waitress at the Morning Glory Diner. I'm on leave now because of the baby." "A waitress," Cromwell repeated, letting the word hang in the air. "Tell me, Mrs. Hayes, when did you first meet the multi-billionaire Marcus Thorne?" I've never met him," she said, her voice small. "I've never even seen him in person. I just know him from the news." "Never met him?" Cromwell feigned shock. "So a man you have never met decided to leave you a fortune larger than the GDP of some countries. How do you explain that?" "I can't," she whispered, shaking her head. "I don't understand any of this." "Perhaps you have a benefactor, someone who introduced you to him, a friend who suggested you might be a worthy recipient of his charity." Cromwell's insinuation was clear. She was a plant, a pawn in someone else's game. "No, I have my husband, my friends. No one knows anyone like that." Her eyes pleaded with Judge Finch, a silent appeal for help. Beatrice Thorne scoffed loudly from her seat. "She's a liar. Look at her, playing the innocent victim, Ms. Thorne, you will be silent, or you will be held in contempt." Judge Finch boomed, his patience wearing thin. He turned back to Cromwell. "Your line of questioning is based on pure speculation, counselor. Do you have any evidence of this alleged manipulation?" "The will itself is the evidence," Cromwell shot back. "It's illogical. It's irrational. The only logical conclusion is that Mr. Thorne's mind was compromised." He then turned to Mr. Vance. "And you, Mr. Vance, you were his lawyer for over 4 decades. Did you not have a duty to protect him from such flights of fancy, or were you complicit?" Elias Vance stood his composure unshaken. "My duty was and is to my client, Mr. Cromwell, and my client was not compromised. He was finally, after 50 years, setting things right." "Setting what right?" Cyrus Thorne demanded. "By destroying his own company and giving it to a stranger." "She is not a stranger," Vance said, his voice dropping, carrying a new weight of sorrow and significance. Every eye in the room was fixed on him. "Your Honor," Vance continued, addressing the judge, "as I mentioned, Marcus left something else, a key, if you will. For 40 years he kept a private journal. He was a man of few words in public, but on these pages he poured out his soul. A week before he passed, he entrusted it to me. He said, 'When the wolves come for her, Elias, this will be her shield.'" Vance walked to his briefcase and retrieved a thick leather-bound volume. It was old, the corners softened with age, the leather cracked and worn. It looked like a sacred text. "The Thorne family believes Marcus was isolated and alone," Vance said. "He was, but his isolation wasn't due to senility. It was due to a heartbreak that occurred half a century ago, a heartbreak orchestrated in part by members of his own family." He directed this last statement towards Beatrice Thorne, whose face for the first time flickered with something other than arrogance. It looked like fear. "What is in that book?" Judge Finch asked, his curiosity overriding judicial protocol. "It is the story of a young woman named Eleanor," Vance said softly. "The love of Marcus Thorne's life. A woman he was forced to abandon, a woman he was told had died, and a woman he spent the next 50 years and billions of dollars trying to find." Vance opened the journal to a bookmarked page. "With the court's permission, I believe Marcus's own words are the only testimony that matters now." Judge Finch stared at the journal. This was no longer a probate hearing. It was an exhumation of secrets long buried. He looked at Amelia, whose wide, confused eyes were fixed on the old lawyer. She had the distinct feeling that she was about to find out who she really was. "Permission granted, Mr. Vance," the judge said. "Read it." The courtroom held a collective breath as Elias Vance put on a pair of silver-rimmed spectacles and opened the worn journal. The pages were yellowed with age, filled with a strong, elegant cursive that had faded over time. Vance's voice, now imbued with the solemnity of a eulogy, began to read. June 12, 1974. "Her name is Eleanor. I saw her today at the university library. She wasn't looking at dusty old business texts like I was. She was reading poetry, Keats, I think. She has hair the color of autumn leaves and eyes that hold a galaxy of laughter. I am a fool. I, Marcus Thorne, son of the indomitable Augustus Thorne, was rendered speechless by a girl with a book. I must speak to her." Vance paused, looking up. He was 22, a student at Columbia, already being groomed to take over his father's burgeoning manufacturing business. Eleanor, as I would later learn, was my older sister. A murmur went through the room. Alistair Cromwell looked momentarily stunned. This wasn't just a lawyer. This was family. "My sister, Eleanor Vance, was on a scholarship." Elias continued, his voice thick with emotion. "Our family had nothing. She was brilliant, kind, and wanted to be a teacher. She was everything the Thornes were not." He turned the page and continued to read from Marcus's journal. September 3, 1974. "I told Father about Eleanor today. I told him I love her. He laughed. He actually laughed. He called her the scholarship girl and told me to end this foolish distraction. He has arranged for me to meet the daughter of a steel magnate. A proper match, he called it. Beatrice was there. She just watched, her eyes cold as ice. They don't understand. Eleanor is not a distraction. She is the only thing that is real." Beatrice Thorne, now in her late 70s, shifted uncomfortably in her chair. The memory, it seemed, was as vivid for her as it was for the man who wrote it. May 20th, 1975. "Eleanor told me tonight. We are going to have a child. I have never known such terror or such joy. A child. Our child. I told her we would run away. We'll go west. I'll get a job. I don't need Father's money. All I need is her. We have a plan. We meet at the bus station on Saturday. Nothing in heaven or on earth will stop me." Amelia Hayes placed a hand on her own stomach, her eyes wide. She felt an eerie, impossible connection to this story, to this woman she'd never known. Vance's voice grew heavy as he turned to the next entry. It was dated a week later. The handwriting was frantic, broken. May 31st, 1975. "She's gone. I went to the station. I waited all night. She never came. I went to her apartment this morning. It was empty. The landlady said she packed her bags and left yesterday. A letter was waiting for me. It just said, 'I can't do this, Marcus. Our worlds are too different. Please don't look for me.' It's a lie. Something is wrong. Father, This was his doing. I confronted him. He denied everything, but I saw it in his eyes. He broke us. He broke me. Cromwell stood up. Your Honor, this is a touching if melodramatic piece of fiction. It's the diary of a lovesick boy. It has no legal bearing on the mental state of a 90-year-old man. Please allow me to finish this entry, Mr. Cromwell. Vance said, his voice dangerously quiet. He continued reading from the journal. My father will never tell me the truth, but Beatrice might. She has a cruel streak, but she fears father more than she loves him. I will find out what they did. I will find my Eleanor. If it takes me the rest of my life, I will find her and our child. Vance closed the journal gently. He spent the next 50 years doing exactly that. He never married. He never loved again. He poured all his energy, all his genius, all his rage into building his father's company into a global empire, Thorn Industries. Not for the money, but for the power to search. He hired the best private investigators in the world. He built databases, created algorithms to search for ghosts. He was looking for one woman, Eleanor Vance. And did he find her? Judge Finch asked, completely captivated. Elias Vance shook his head sadly. No, he never did. Because my family was told a lie just as he was. A week after she disappeared, a man from Thorn Industries came to our parents' home. He told them Marcus had ended the relationship, that he wanted nothing to do with Eleanor or the baby. He gave them $10,000, a fortune to us then, and told them to ensure she never contacted him again. Heartbroken and ashamed, my sister left town. We lost contact for many years. So where is the connection to Mrs. Hayes? Cromwell demanded, trying to regain control. This is a tragic story, but it's not evidence. I'm getting to that, Vance said, his eyes locking with Beatrice Thorne's. Marcus was right about one thing. His father wasn't the sole architect of his pain. Years later, his father Augustus had a stroke. On his deathbed, he confessed to Marcus. He admitted he'd sent the man to my family, but he revealed one more monstrous lie he had told Marcus a year after Eleanor disappeared. Vance opened the journal to a much later entry dated nearly 20 years after the first. The ink was darker, the handwriting just as precise, but filled with a palpable rage. October 15th, 1994. Father confessed today. He told me the last part of his lie. A year after she left, he told me he had found Eleanor. He told me she had died in childbirth and that the baby had died with her. He said he did it to give me closure. He did not give me closure. He entombed my heart. For 20 years I have been mourning a ghost he created. He did not tell me where she was buried. He said it was better not to know. But now I know she might still be alive. The search begins again. Eleanor is alive, and so somewhere is my child, my only heir. The courtroom was utterly still. The story wasn't about a deluded old man. It was about a 50-year search for a lost love and a secret child. Amelia Hayes was no longer just a confused bystander. She was staring into the abyss of her own history, and the ghost of a woman named Eleanor was staring back. Liam held her, trying to shield her from the impossible weight of it all, but they both knew deep down that the last piece of the puzzle was about to fall into place, and it would land directly on them. The revelations from Marcus Thorne's journal had transformed the atmosphere in the courtroom. What began as a legal challenge to a will had become a trial of the Thorne family itself, with a ghost named Eleanor as the chief prosecutor. Alistair Cromwell, though visibly shaken, was a master of his craft. He knew he had to discredit the journal. Your Honor, a poignant tale. But a tale is all it is. A private diary is not a legal document. It's hearsay. For all we know, Mr. Vance, having access to his client for decades, could have fabricated this entire narrative. Elias Vance didn't even flinch. Are you accusing me of forgery and fraud, Mr. Cromwell? I am suggesting, Cromwell said smoothly, that this diary is a convenient, unverifiable story designed to legitimize an insane will. Where is the proof? Where is this Eleanor? My sister Eleanor passed away 6 years ago. Vance said, a fresh wave of sadness in his voice. She lived a quiet life. She was a school teacher in a small town in Oregon. She never knew Marcus was looking for her. She believed he had abandoned her, and the shame of it. It was a burden she carried her entire life. How convenient, Beatrice Thorne sneered from her seat. The key witness is dead. She may be, Vance retorted, turning to face her directly, but her story is not. You claim this journal is a fabrication. Marcus anticipated that. He knew the depths of his family's deceit. He reached back into his briefcase. This, Your Honor, is not a journal entry. This is a sworn affidavit from Marcus Thorne's head of security, a man named Robert Jenkins, taken 2 months ago. He handed the document to Judge Finch. Mr. Jenkins has worked for the Thorne family for 40 years. In the affidavit, he confesses that in 1975, as a young security aide, he was ordered by Augustus Thorne and his daughter Beatrice to follow Eleanor Vance. He was the one who intercepted her on her way to the bus station. He was the one who told her Marcus had changed his mind. And he was the one who delivered the letter, a letter written not by Eleanor, but by Beatrice Thorne herself, to Marcus's apartment. The blood drained from Beatrice's face. She looked at Cromwell, her eyes wide with panic. The carefully constructed facade of the aggrieved matriarch was crumbling. Lies, all lies, she shrieked. Jenkins is a disgruntled former employee we fired for theft. He was not fired for theft, Ms. Thorne, Vance said, his voice like steel. He retired with a full pension 2 months ago, the day after he gave this affidavit to Marcus. It seems his conscience, unlike yours, was not for sale. Judge Finch finished reading the affidavit. He looked at Beatrice Thorne with utter contempt. Ms. Thorne, this sworn statement alleges you actively participated in fraud, forgery, and the intentional infliction of emotional distress, which derailed the entire course of your brother's life. Do you have anything to say to that? Beatrice was speechless. Her nephew Cyrus jumped to his feet. This is character assassination. My aunt is a respected philanthropist. This is a smear campaign to steal our family's birthright. Your birthright, Vance said, his voice resonating with moral authority, was built on a foundation of your great-uncle's lifelong agony. An agony your family created and then profited from. But you still haven't asked the most important question, Mr. Thorne. You're all so focused on Eleanor. You've forgotten about the baby. All eyes turned back to Vance. The final terrifying question hung in the air. My sister Eleanor, Vance began, his gaze now settling on Amelia, gave birth to a healthy baby girl on January 12, 1976. Believing she had been abandoned by a wealthy family that despised her, she wanted her daughter to have a simple, normal life, free from the Thorne name and the pain associated with it. She gave the baby her own middle name, Rose, and the surname of a man she later married, a kind mechanic who raised the girl as his own. She named her daughter Sarah, Sarah Rose. Liam Hayes, the carpenter, suddenly looked up, a dawning horror and understanding on his face. He knew that name. He stared at his wife, his mouth agape. Sarah grew up in Oregon, Vance continued. She became a nurse. She married her high school sweetheart. They had one child, a daughter. He paused, letting the pieces connect in everyone's mind. Tragically, Sarah and her husband were killed in a car accident 7 years ago. Their daughter, who was 18 at the time, was left an orphan. She moved here to Oakwood County to be closer to her only living relatives, her maternal grandparents, before they too passed away. Elias Vance took a step towards Amelia's table. His eyes were soft, filled with a mixture of sadness for the past and hope for the future. Marcus Thorne's search for his child ended 2 months ago. Using the resources of his entire empire, he finally found a death certificate for an Eleanor Vance that matched the right age and profile. From there, he found her daughter Sarah. And from there, he looked directly at Amelia Hayes, his voice gentle but clear. He found you, Amelia Rose Hayes. Your mother was Sarah Rose. Your grandmother was Eleanor Vance. The words hit Amelia like a physical blow. Her entire identity, her understanding of who she was, evaporated in an instant. Her mother, the woman she mourned, was the secret child of a billionaire. Her grandmother, whom she barely remembered, was the lost love from the journal. And the man on the news, the powerful, mysterious Marcus Thorne, was her grandfather. She wasn't a stranger. She was his granddaughter. She was the last of his line. She was his sole heir, not by whim or madness, but by blood. Alistair Cromwell stood frozen, his case, his arguments, his entire strategy disintegrating into dust. Cyrus Thorne collapsed into his chair as if his strings had been cut. Beatrice Thorne simply stared into the middle distance, a woman haunted by the ghosts of her own making. But for Judge Finch, one final question remained. It was the linchpin that held it all together. "Mr. Vance," the judge said, his voice hushed. "It is an incredible story. But ancestry is not enough. How can you prove it? How did Marcus Thorne know for certain that she was the one?" The question echoed in the silent courtroom. The narrative was powerful, the journal entries moving, the affidavit damning. But in a court of law, especially with $50 billion on the line, a story wasn't enough. Hard, irrefutable proof was required. Alistair Cromwell saw a sliver of hope. "Exactly, Your Honor. This is a fantasy woven by an old man. There is no definitive proof connecting my client's uncle to this woman." Elias Vance waited for him to finish, his calm demeanor a stark contrast to Cromwell's desperation. "Marcus Thorne was not a man who dealt in fantasies, Mr. Cromwell. He was a man of data, of absolute certainty. He spent his life searching, and when he finally found Amelia, he had to be 100% sure." Vance turned to Judge Finch. "Your Honor, after Marcus located Amelia, he hired a local private investigator, not to harass her, but simply to observe. He wanted to know what kind of person his granddaughter had become. The investigator's report is here," he said, tapping his briefcase. "It described a hard-working, honest young woman, a woman deeply in love with her husband, a woman preparing to bring a new life into the world, a woman who, despite having lost her parents and grandparents, faced the world with resilience and kindness. In her, Marcus saw his Eleanor." Amelia blushed, overwhelmed by the idea of a secret billionaire grandfather watching her from afar, studying her life at the diner, her walks in the park with Liam. "But he needed more than a feeling," Vance continued. "He needed science. The investigator was given one final task, a simple one. 3 months ago, Amelia and her husband were having coffee at an outdoor cafe. The investigator, posing as a busboy, collected the disposable cup Amelia drank from after she left. Cromwell's eyes widened, realizing where this was going. "That cup," Vance said, his voice ringing with finality, "was sealed in an evidence bag and sent overnight to a world-renowned genetics lab in Switzerland, a lab that Thorne Industries had secretly acquired years ago for this very purpose. The lab already had a DNA sample from Marcus on file taken during a medical procedure." Vance reached into his briefcase for the last time. He pulled out a thick, sealed envelope with the letterhead of a Swiss laboratory, Helvetia Genetic Diagnostics. "He did not tell me the results until the day he signed the will. He wanted to see it for himself in black and white before he changed the course of history. This, Your Honor, is the certified court-admissible report from that lab." He handed the envelope to the bailiff, who presented it to Judge Finch. The judge broke the seal with a letter opener. The silence was so profound that the slice of the paper sounded like a crack of thunder. He unfolded the multi-page report, his eyes scanning the technical data, the charts of genetic markers, the columns of matching sequences. He finally looked up, his gaze falling upon Amelia. There was a new softness in his eyes, a look of profound wonder. "The report concludes," Judge Finch announced, his voice carrying the immense weight of the verdict, "that there is a 99.99999% probability that the DNA sample provided by Subject A, Marcus Thorne, and the DNA sample provided by Subject B, recovered from the coffee cup belonging to Amelia Hayes, indicates a direct grandfather-granddaughter relationship." It was over. The science was absolute. The link was proven. The story was true. Amelia Rose Hayes was the granddaughter of Marcus Thorne, Alistair Cromwell slowly packed his gold-embossed briefcase. There were no more arguments to be made. His clients were not just disinherited. They were disgraced, their family's darkest secrets laid bare in a public courtroom. Cyrus Thorne stared at the floor, the image of a future CEO of Thorne Industries dissolving before his eyes. Beatrice Thorne, a shrunken figure of malice, finally broke. A single dry sob escaped her lips, a sound of loss, not for her brother, but for her fortune. Amelia, however, was not looking at them. She was looking at Elias Vance, this quiet, dignified man who was her great-uncle. The last living link to a grandmother she never knew, and a grandfather who had found her just before he was gone forever. Liam's arm was a steel band around her. He wasn't holding the heiress to a $50 billion empire. He was holding his wife, Amy, the girl he'd loved since high school, who was now trembling in the face of a future so vast and terrifying it was impossible to comprehend. The $800 for the security deposit seemed like a joke from another lifetime. Judge Finch looked at the young couple. He saw their fear, their shock, their love. They were good people thrust into an impossible situation. His role as judge was nearly complete. His legal duty was clear, but his human duty compelled him to offer something more. He cleared his throat. In light of this overwhelming evidence, he began looking directly at the Thorne family's legal table. The court sees no grounds to support the claim of undue influence or lack of testamentary capacity. The will of Marcus Thorne appears to be in every respect rational, deliberate, and legally sound. He then turned his full attention to Amelia and Liam. The storm of legal battle was over. The aftermath was just beginning. Judge Arthur Finch surveyed his courtroom, a kingdom of polished wood and solemn law over which he had presided for 3 decades. He had seen fortunes won and lost, families torn asunder, and justice meted out in measures both great and small. But never this. Never a case where the very definition of legacy, love, and identity was being rewritten before his eyes. He picked up his gavel, its weight familiar in his hand, but he knew the true power in the room no longer sat with him. It had shifted irrevocably to the quiet, pregnant young woman who was staring at him with eyes that held the history of a 50-year-old heartbreak. "This court is now prepared to rule," he announced. His voice, usually a simple instrument of legal declaration, carried an unusual resonance, a tone that spoke not just to the law, but to the profound human epic that had unfolded. Regarding the injunction filed by the estate of Beatrice and Cyrus Thorne to contest the last will and testament of Marcus Thorne. He paused, letting his gaze fall upon Cyrus, then Beatrice. Cyrus's jaw was clenched, his knuckles white where he gripped the table. He was a man on a precipice, still believing his sheer force of will could hold back the tide. Beatrice was unnaturally still, her face a porcelain mask that threatened to crack. In light of the evidence presented, Judge Finch continued, this court finds the petitioner's claims of fraud, undue influence, and lack of testamentary capacity to be not only without merit, but to be a deliberate and cynical misrepresentation of the truth. The personal journals of Mr. Thorne do not depict a man in a state of delusion. They depict a man of singular lifelong purpose. The sworn affidavit of Robert Jenkins does not suggest a conspiracy against the Thorne family. It reveals a conspiracy by the Thorne family. And finally, the DNA analysis. It is not a matter of interpretation. It is a matter of scientific fact. It is the unimpeachable biological truth. Each sentence was a nail being hammered into the coffin of the Thornes' claim. Alistair Cromwell's professional veneer had vanished. He looked pale and exhausted, a general who had just witnessed the complete annihilation of his army. Judge Finch leaned forward slightly. The will of Marcus Thorne is not the act of a compromised mind. It is perhaps the sanest and most rational act of his entire life, a final, desperate, and ultimately successful attempt to correct a monstrous injustice, to restore a legacy to the bloodline from which it was stolen. He lifted the gavel high. The injunction is denied. The will as executed by Mr. Elias Vance is declared valid and binding." He brought the gavel down. The crack was not just a sound, it was a shockwave. It was the sound of an empire changing hands, of a dynasty falling, of a promise finally kept. "So ordered." For a moment no one moved. Cyrus Thorne stared at the judge, his face a canvas of disbelief that slowly morphed into pure, undiluted rage. "This is a travesty," he hissed, his voice trembling. "An absolute circus. You have allowed this nobody, to walk away with our birthright based on the sentimental scribblings of a senile old man." Judge Finch's eyes turned to steel. "Your birthright, Mr. Thorne, was forfeit the moment your family chose deceit over decency. And I am not finished." He shuffled the papers before him, his expression hardening further. "The evidence brought forth in this courtroom today suggests crimes were committed. Serious crimes. Fraud, forgery, conspiracy. Justice is not a matter of convenience, nor does it have a statute of limitations on morality." He looked directly at Beatrice, whose mask had finally shattered, revealing the terrified, malevolent woman beneath. "Therefore, this court will be forwarding the full transcript of these proceedings, including the affidavit of Mr. Jenkins, to the district attorney's office for immediate review. Let them determine if Ms. Beatrice Thorne's actions in 1975 warrant a criminal investigation." Beatrice let out a strangled gasp. It was one thing to lose the money. It was another thing entirely to face the prospect of trading her lavish mansion for a jail cell. She stumbled backward, grabbing Cromwell's arm for support, her carefully constructed world collapsing into ruin. Before the defeated party could flee, Judge Finch held up a hand. "One last piece of business." His voice lightened, a wry, almost weary tone creeping in as he turned his gaze to the back of the courtroom. "Mr. Peterson, I believe we still have the matter of Heir's Peterson Properties on the docket." The landlord, who had been watching the proceedings with the slack-jawed awe of a man seeing a UFO landing, jolted as if struck by an electric current. He scrambled to his feet, his face a mess of panic and obsequious apology. "Your Honor, Judge Finch, sir. That was a simple clerical error. A mix-up in the paperwork. A complete and utter misunderstanding." He turned to Amelia, his voice practically dripping with false sincerity. "Mrs. Hayes, my deepest, most profound apologies. The security deposit, the full $800, it will be messengered to you this afternoon, with interest, and a floral arrangement, a very large one for the baby." He gave a short, awkward bow and practically sprinted out of the courtroom, desperate to escape the orbit of his now infinitely powerful former tenant. A shaky, hysterical laugh escaped Liam's lips. It was a sound of pure sensory overload, the only possible response to the absurdity of the universe. He pulled Amelia into his arms, burying his face in her hair. The Thornes and their lawyer, moving like specters, gathered their things and swept out of the courtroom without a backward glance, their silent exit more damning than any shout. The heavy oak doors clicked shut, plunging the room into a sudden, profound silence. It was over. The only ones left were Judge Finch, slowly unrobbing on the bench, and the three people at the center of the storm, Amelia, Liam, and their great-uncle, Elias Vance. Elias placed a gentle, wrinkled hand on Amelia's arm. "He knew, you know," the old lawyer said, his voice thick with emotion. "The last time I saw him, he showed me your picture, just a candid photo the investigator had taken. You were laughing at something your husband had said. He stared at it for the longest time, and he told me, 'She has Eleanor's smile. It's all going to be okay, Elias.'" Tears streamed down Amelia's face, but for the first time they were not tears of fear or confusion. They were tears of connection, of grief for a grandfather she never met and a grandmother she now understood. Judge Finch stepped down from the bench, his official duties concluded. He approached them not as a judge, but as a man. "Mrs. Hayes, Liam," he said, his voice now gentle, "I don't think I have the words to properly express, well, anything that would be adequate for this moment. I wish you congratulations on your inheritance and my sincere condolences for the family story you have discovered in such a brutal fashion." "Thank you, Your Honor," Mrs. Hayes Amelia whispered, leaning against Liam's strength. I feel like I'm dreaming. I don't know what any of this means. For now, Liam said, his voice a steady anchor in her swirling sea of emotions. It means we go home. It means I make us some dinner. And it means we sit on our lumpy old couch and we talk about names for our son. The rest can wait until tomorrow. Judge Finch smiled a genuine warm smile. He saw the truth in the carpenter's simple plan. The $50 billion was a phantom and abstract number. But a husband's love, a home-cooked meal, a baby on the way, that was the bedrock of life. That is the wisest judgment I have heard all day, the judge said. As they turned to leave, Amelia paused at the door and looked back one last time. The courtroom was no longer a place of terror. It was a crucible. She had walked in as Amelia Hayes, a waitress fighting for what she was owed. She was leaving as something more. She was the granddaughter of Marcus Thorne, the great niece of Elias Vance, the keeper of Eleanor's memory. She felt the weight of it all, not as a burden of gold, but as a mantle of responsibility. This immense world-altering power was now hers. It was her child's. It was a tool to build, to heal, to honor the man who searched for her his entire life. Watching them walk down the empty hall, the quiet carpenter with his arm around the bewildered new queen of an invisible empire, Judge Finch felt a sense of peace he hadn't experienced in years. He had upheld the law, yes. But today in courtroom 4B he had been a witness to something far more rare and beautiful. He had witnessed justice. What an incredible story. It began with a fight over $800 and ended with a verdict that transferred one of the world's largest fortunes. But this was never truly about the money. It was about a promise a young man made in a journal 50 years ago. A promise to find the love he lost and the child he never knew. Marcus Thorne's true legacy wasn't his company. It was the justice he delivered from beyond the grave, ensuring his fortune would build a future for the family he was denied. Amelia and Liam walked out of that courtroom with unimaginable wealth. But their greatest treasure was the one they already had, each other, and the new life they were about to welcome. If this story of love loss and ultimate justice moved you, please show your support by hitting that like button. Share this video with someone who needs to be reminded that truth can be more powerful than any lie. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications for more true stories that prove sometimes the most unbelievable tales are the ones that really happen. Thank you for listening. What do you do when the man who swore to protect you, the man who gently kisses your pregnant belly each night, is the very same man living a stunningly deceitful double life? You're about to hear the story of Eleanor Vance, a woman who had it all, a thriving career, a luxurious home, and a husband she adored. But on one glittering evening at the city's most prestigious charity gala, her perfect world wasn't just shattered, it was publicly detonated. This isn't just a story about infidelity. It's a story of calculated betrayal, a powerful family conspiracy, and the moment one woman decided she wouldn't just be a victim, she would be the victor. Stay tuned. Eleanor Vance believed in the architecture of a good life. As a partner at a boutique architectural firm in Boston, she designed spaces that were both beautiful and functional, built on foundations of integrity and clear sightlines. She believed her own life shared with her husband Julian was built to the same exacting standards. Their three-story brownstone in Beacon Hill was a testament to their success, a blend of historic charm and minimalist modernity she had designed herself. At 7 months pregnant with their first child, a son, she felt the final crucial beam of their perfect life settling into place. Julian was the charismatic other half of their power couple image. A senior vice president at a private equity firm, he was sharp, ambitious, and devastatingly handsome. He had a way of making anyone he spoke to feel like the only person in the room. He was a doting husband, often bringing her flowers for no reason and massaging her swollen ankles after a long day. He would press his ear to her belly, whispering promises to their unborn son Liam. To the outside world, and even to Eleanor most of the time, the Vances were the blueprint for happiness. But even the most meticulously designed structures can have hidden flaws, hairline cracks that spread silently before the collapse. The first crack appeared on a Tuesday. It arrived as a notification on her phone, a fraud alert from their joint black card account. Charge for $18,750 at Cartier. Please confirm this purchase. Eleanor frowned. She hadn't bought anything. Julian was in back-to-back meetings all day. She tapped no on the alert and called the credit card company, assuming it was a simple error. But the customer service agent was polite and firm. The purchase was made in person an hour ago at the Newberry Street boutique. Her husband, Mr. Julian Vance, had used the card. His signature was on file. Confusion gave way to a prickle of unease. $18,000. For what his mother's birthday was months away. Their anniversary had just passed. Perhaps it was a surprise for her, a push present, as her friends had joked about. But Julian wasn't one for extravagant surprises like that. He was meticulously practical, a planner. He would have discussed it. She decided to let it go, to wait for him to tell her. A surprise was still the most logical explanation. He came home that night kissing her deeply, his hands immediately going to her belly. "How are my two favorite people?" he asked, his voice a warm, familiar melody. She smiled, waiting. "We're good. Long day for you." "Unbelievable. The Dalton merger is a beast." He sighed, loosening his tie. "You wouldn't believe the numbers." He talked about work all through dinner. He mentioned his team, the late nights ahead, the pressure from the board. Not a word about Cartier, not a hint of a little velvet box. The unease returned a cold knot in her stomach. Why would he hide such a purchase? The cracks began to spread faster after that. There were the hushed phone calls he'd take in his study, closing the solid oak doors that were usually left open. When she'd walk by, his voice would drop to an indecipherable murmur. He started working late more often, coming home smelling not of his office, but of a faint, unfamiliar perfume, something floral and sweet, a stark contrast to her own subtle sandalwood scent. When she asked about it, he'd laugh it off. "Must have been someone in the elevator, darling. You know how those scents cling." He became overly protective of his phone, which now lived face down on his nightstand. Once she reached for it to use the flashlight, and he snapped, "I'll get it," with a sharpness that startled them both. He apologized immediately, blaming stress, but the damage was done. The open sightlines of their life were suddenly filled with locked doors and hidden corners. Eleanor was an architect. She saw patterns. She understood that small, seemingly unrelated issues often pointed to a larger foundational problem. The late nights, the secret calls, the cloying scent of another woman's perfume, and the massive, unexplained jewelry purchase, they weren't separate cracks. They were mapping the fault line of a single catastrophic lie. The final piece of evidence she needed, the one that turned suspicion into devastating certainty, came a week before the annual Avery Foundation benefit gala. It was the social event of the season, and Julian's firm was a primary sponsor. He had a table, and they were expected to be the picture of marital bliss and corporate success. Eleanor was looking through their shared iPad for a dinner recipe when an email notification popped up at the top of the screen. It was from the Grand Astoria Hotel where the gala was being held. The subject line was simple: "Your reservation is confirmed." Her heart hammered against her ribs. He had already booked their room for the night of the gala weeks ago. Why would there be another confirmation? Her fingers trembled as she tapped it open. "Dear Mr. Vance, thank you for your booking. We are pleased to confirm your reservation for the Celestial Suite for the evening of Saturday, August 30th. Guest name Julian Vance, additional guest Chloe Sterling. Package romance celebration. Includes late checkout, champagne on ice, and a dozen red roses. Chloe Sterling." The name echoed in her mind. She'd heard Julian mention it once or twice. A new analyst in his department. Young, bright, fiercely ambitious. He'd called her a real shark. Eleanor felt the air leave her lungs, a silent, crushing blow. It wasn't just a fling. This was a planned romantic rendezvous. In the same hotel. On the same night as the gala where he would be sitting with his pregnant wife, the sheer audacity of it, the contemptuous disrespect burned through her shock and straight into a cold, hard rage. The Cartier purchase slammed back into her mind. It wasn't a push present for her. It was a gift for Chloe. She stood in the center of her beautiful, perfectly designed kitchen, her hand resting protectively on her son, who was kicking gently within her. The foundation of her life hadn't just cracked, it had been dynamited. But Eleanor Vance was not a woman who would stand by and watch her life crumble. She was a builder, and if she had to, she would be a demolitions expert. She looked at the date on the confirmation. Saturday, August 30th, 3 days from now. The gala. He wasn't just going to cheat on her. He was planning to humiliate her under the same roof. A chilling calm settled over her. He thought she was fragile, distracted by the pregnancy. He thought she was oblivious. He had underestimated her. The Avery Gala would still be a night of revelations, she decided. But she would be the one writing the script. The next 3 days were a masterclass in deception, a performance worthy of an Oscar. Eleanor moved through her life with a preternatural calm, a serene smile fixed on her face. On the surface, she was the glowing, expectant mother discussing nursery colors and birth plans. Beneath, she was a general plotting a war. The rage hadn't subsided. It had solidified, sharpening into a diamond-hard point of focus. She called her best friend Sarah Chen, a litigation lawyer known for her take-no-prisoners attitude in the courtroom. She met her at a quiet cafe far from their usual neighborhood haunts. Without preamble, Eleanor laid out the evidence, the credit card statement from Cartier. She had since pulled up the hotel confirmation, the pattern of lies. Sarah listened, her expression shifting from sympathy to a cold fury that mirrored Eleanor's own. The celestial suite, the romance celebration package, the absolute nerve of that man. Sarah hissed, her fingers drumming on the table. Okay, Ellie, we have 2 options. Option A, you pack a bag, I send my most vicious divorce attorney to his office Monday morning and we bleed him dry, quietly, efficiently. And option B, Eleanor asked, her voice steady. Sarah leaned forward, a glint in her eye. Option B is the one I know you want. You confront him, but not now. Not in the privacy of your beautiful home where he can spin more lies and gaslight you into oblivion. You do it on your terms, on your stage. The gala, Eleanor said. It wasn't a question. The gala, Sarah confirmed. In front of his partners, his clients, his rivals. In front of his insufferable mother. You don't scream, you don't cry. You are grace and steel. You present the facts as coldly and clearly as an architect presenting a blueprint. You let his public image burn to the ground. And I'll be right there with you. The plan began to take shape. Sarah would be her second in command, her witness. The first step was preparation. Eleanor went to her final dress fitting for the gala. The gown was a custom-made creation by a local designer, a deep emerald green silk that draped elegantly over her 7-month bump, with intricate beading at the shoulders that caught the light like tiny shards of glass. When she first commissioned it, she thought of it as a celebration of her pregnancy, of her life with Julian. Now she saw it as armor. The day of the gala, the performance continued. She let Julian kiss her goodbye that morning, a phantom touch that made her skin crawl. Big night tonight, darling, he'd said, smiling. You'll be the most beautiful woman there. I can't wait, she'd replied, her own smile feeling like a mask. She spent the day methodically preparing. She had her hair styled in a sophisticated chignon, her makeup done professionally to highlight her eyes and give her a look of untouchable elegance. Every detail was a piece of her battle armor. She printed out the Cartier receipt. She printed out the hotel confirmation for the celestial suite with Chloe Sterling's name clearly visible. She folded them neatly and tucked them into her small beaded clutch. As the evening approached, Julian came home to change. He was buoyant, humming as he put on his tuxedo. He looked at her resplendent in her emerald gown, and his eyes widened with what looked like genuine admiration. Eleanor, he breathed, walking over to her. "You are stunning, absolutely breathtaking." He placed his hands on her belly. "Liam is a lucky boy to have such a gorgeous mother." For a fleeting second, her resolve wavered. The man she loved, the life she had built, was she really about to set a torch to it all? The baby kicked a hard, insistent thump against Julian's hand as if reminding her of the future she was fighting for. The wavering stopped. This wasn't just about her anymore. This was about protecting her son from a legacy of lies. She smiled coolly. "You look very handsome too, Julian. It's going to be an unforgettable night." "It certainly is," he said, completely oblivious to the double meaning. The drive to the Grand Astoria Hotel was thick with unspoken words. The city lights of Boston blurred past the window of the town car. Julian chattered about the people who would be there, the networking he needed to do. Eleanor simply nodded her hand, resting on her clutch, the sharp corners of the printed papers a grounding reality against her fingertips. They arrived. The entrance to the hotel's grand ballroom was a spectacle of flashing cameras and socialites in designer gowns. Julian took her arm, plastering on his public smile. "Here we go," he whispered, guiding her onto the red carpet. They posed for the photographers, a perfect picture of wealth and happiness. Eleanor's smile was brilliant, unwavering. She knew the cameras were capturing a before photo. There would be no after. Inside the ballroom was a sea of glittering crystal chandeliers, towering floral arrangements, and the hum of 100 conversations. They found their table sponsored by Julian's firm, filled with his partners and their spouses. Eleanor greeted them all warmly, accepting compliments on her dress and her glow. She scanned the room, her eyes moving with deliberate slowness. And then she saw her. Across the ballroom, standing near the bar, was a young woman in a fire engine red dress that was both too tight and too revealing for the occasion. She was laughing, holding a glass of champagne, her eyes darting around the room with a hungry ambition. Eleanor didn't need an introduction. She knew with every fiber of her being that this was Chloe Sterling. But the most chilling detail was the diamond tennis bracelet on the woman's wrist. It glittered under the chandeliers, a vulgar beacon. It was brand new, its diamonds catching the light with a fiery brilliance. Eleanor's mind flashed to the $18,750 charge at Cartier. Her breath hitched, but her expression remained serene. Then she saw Julian's mother, Genevieve Vance, approaching their table. A formidable woman with perfectly coiffed silver hair and a gaze that could freeze fire, Genevieve had only ever offered Eleanor a frosty tolerance. She saw Eleanor as not quite up to the Vance standard. "Eleanor," Genevieve said, her voice clipped. "You look, well, pregnancy seems to agree with you." It was the closest she could come to a compliment. "Genevieve," Eleanor replied, her tone even. "Lovely to see you." Genevieve's eyes flickered across the room past Eleanor's shoulder. For a split second her gaze softened, a flicker of something like approval in her eyes as she looked towards the bar, towards the woman in the red dress. And in that instant Eleanor understood a new horrifying truth. Genevieve didn't just know about the affair, she approved of it. The final piece of armor clicked into place. This wasn't just a battle against her husband. It was a war against his family. And she was completely, utterly alone. Except for Sarah, who caught her eye from a nearby table and gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. "It's time." The evening wore on, a symphony of clinking glasses, polite laughter, and the droning speeches of philanthropists. Eleanor played her part, engaging in small talk, smiling at Julian's anecdotes, a portrait of serene motherhood. All the while her senses were heightened, tracking Julian's movements, his stolen glances across the room. She watched him excuse himself, supposedly to network with the mayor's aide, and saw his path deviate towards the bar, towards the red dress. This was the moment. She waited a full minute, letting him get comfortable in his lie. Then she rose slowly from her seat, her emerald dress shimmering. "Excuse me for a moment," she said to the table at large, her voice calm and light. "I think I need to stretch my legs." She walked not towards the powder room, but directly towards the bar. Each step was deliberate, a slow, inexorable advance. The crowd seemed to part for the pregnant woman in the stunning green gown. She could feel their eyes on her admiring glances that would soon turn to shock. She saw them before they saw her. Julian and Chloe. They were tucked into a small alcove partially obscured by a marble pillar. His back was to her, but his posture was intimate, one hand resting on the small of Chloe's back. Chloe was looking up at him, her expression a nauseating mix of adoration and triumph. The diamond bracelet, her family's money, her child's inheritance, was a cruel fire on the woman's wrist. They were laughing, sharing a private joke. Eleanor stopped just a few feet away, the ambient noise of the gala seeming to fade into a dull roar in her ears. "Julian," she said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it cut through their private bubble like a shard of ice. Julian froze. He turned around and the color drained from his face. The charming, confident man was gone, replaced by a cornered animal. His eyes darted from Eleanor to Chloe, panic flickering within them. "Eleanor, darling," he stammered, taking a step towards her, trying to physically block Chloe from her view. "I was just discussing a market analysis with Miss Sterling. She's one of our sharpest new talents." Chloe Sterling's smug smile faltered slightly, but she held her ground, looking Eleanor up and down with a dismissive air. It was the look of a woman who believed she had already won, that Eleanor was a temporary bloated obstacle soon to be removed. Eleanor ignored her completely. Her eyes, cold and clear, were locked on her husband. "A market analysis," she repeated, her voice dangerously soft. "Is that what you call it? It must be a very in-depth analysis to require a romance celebration package in the celestial suite upstairs." Julian's jaw went slack. He looked as if she had physically struck him. What are you talking about? You're not making any sense. You must be tired, honey the baby." "Don't," she cut him off, her voice dropping to a whisper that was more menacing than a shout. "Do not use our son as an excuse for your filth." Chloe, seeing Julian falter, decided to step in. It was a fatal miscalculation. "Look," she said, stepping forward, a condescending smirk on her face. "I don't know what you think you heard, but Julian and I are colleagues. Maybe you should control your pregnancy hormones." This was the moment Eleanor had been waiting for. The direct engagement. She finally turned her gaze to Chloe, a slow, deliberate act of dismissal. She looked at the garish red dress, the overly ambitious makeup, and finally at the glittering bracelet on her wrist. "This bracelet," Eleanor said, her voice ringing with newfound clarity, "was purchased for $18,750 last Tuesday at Cartier on Newberry Street, using my family's joint account." She didn't look at Chloe's face, only at the bracelet, as if addressing an inanimate object. "It was purchased as a gift. But I think there's been a mistake. You see, the gift was for a mistress, and you are merely a symptom. A temporary diversion. The bracelet, however, is a marital asset. I'd like it back." A small gasp came from a woman standing nearby who had stopped to listen. The bubble of silence around them was expanding. People were turning, conversations were dying down. The drama was far more interesting than any keynote speaker. Chloe blanched instinctively, covering the bracelet with her other hand. I don't know what you're talking about. Julian gave this to me." "I know he did," Eleanor said calmly. She opened her clutch and removed the folded Cartier receipt. She held it out, not for Chloe, but for Julian. "Here is the proof of purchase, and Julian," she continued, her voice gaining strength as the audience grew, "since you seem to be confused about your plans for the evening, perhaps this will refresh your memory." She pulled out the second piece of paper, the hotel confirmation. She unfolded it and held it up. Her hands were perfectly steady. "This is a confirmation for the Celestial Suite. Tonight. Check-in was an hour ago. The reservation is for 2 guests, Julian Vance and Chloe Sterling." She paused, letting the names hang in the suddenly silent ballroom. "It even includes champagne and roses. How thoughtful." Julian was speechless, his face a mask of horror. He was exposed, his carefully constructed world imploding in the most public way imaginable. He looked around at the faces of his colleagues, his clients all staring at him with a mixture of shock and pity. Eleanor turned her attention back to Chloe one last time. You are in a room full of the most powerful people in this city wearing a stolen bracelet and planning a rendezvous with another woman's husband. This is not the grand entrance into society you thought it was. This is your professional and social suicide note. Chloe's arrogant facade finally crumbled, replaced by fear and humiliation. Tears welled in her eyes. Julian, she whimpered, looking at him for help. But Julian couldn't even look at her. He was staring at Eleanor, at the ruins of his life. Now, Eleanor said, her voice resonating with authority through the cavernous room. I believe it's time for you to leave. The silence in the Grand Astoria ballroom was absolute. It was a heavy-weighted silence thick with scandal and the intoxicating thrill of someone else's spectacular ruin. The band had faltered mid-song, the string quartet holding their bows aloft as if frozen in time. Every eye was on the tableau by the marble pillar, the regal pregnant wife, the disgraced husband, and the weeping mistress. Eleanor didn't need to raise her voice. Her words had been a precision strike, and now she just had to watch the fallout. She looked past her husband, her gaze sweeping the room until it landed on the hotel's head of security, a stern-looking man named Mr. Davies, who was already moving purposefully in their direction, his earpiece crackling. Julian finally found his voice, a desperate, strangled whisper. Eleanor, please, not here. We can talk about this at home. Please don't do this. Talk. Eleanor's laugh was a short, bitter sound. The time for talking was before you bought another woman jewelry with our money. Before you booked a suite to sleep with her in the same building as your pregnant wife. The time for talking is over, Julian. This is the time for consequences. Mr. Davies arrived, flanked by two other uniformed security guards. He addressed Eleanor with quiet respect. Mrs. Vance, is there a problem here? No problem at all, Mr. Davies, Eleanor said, her tone perfectly composed. Just a small misunderstanding. This woman, she gestured towards Chloe without looking at her, seems to be under the impression that she is a guest at this private event. She is not on the guest list for our table, nor for any other, I believe. She is also in possession of stolen property. Chloe gasped, a fresh wave of tears streaming down her face, ruining her carefully applied makeup. It's not stolen. He gave it to me, she cried, her voice rising with hysteria. The spectacle was getting better by the second for the onlookers. Mr. Davies said, his voice a low, implacable rumble. I'm going to have to ask you to come with me. No, Julian, do something! Chloe shrieked, grabbing Julian's arm. Julian shook her off, his survival instincts finally kicking in. He was trying to distance himself to salvage something from the wreckage. I don't know what she's talking about, he said weakly, looking at Mr. Davies. This is a private matter between my wife and me. This employee is just confused. Confused? Eleanor's voice was laced with ice. She seemed perfectly clear on the room number of the celestial suite. Perhaps you can ask her to recite the details of the romance celebration package you so generously booked for her. The crowd murmured. The humiliation was exquisite, a slow public dissection. One of the female security guards gently took Chloe's arm. Miss, please, let's go. Chloe resisted, her face contorting in a mask of ugly desperation. You can't do this. I work for him. I'm his girlfriend, she screamed. The final fatal admission. The collective intake of breath in the ballroom was audible. Julian flinched as if he'd been shot. The word girlfriend erased any possibility of this being a simple one-time mistake. It spoke of a relationship, of a planned future, of a deeper betrayal. Eleanor looked at her husband and saw the full measure of his weakness. He didn't defend Chloe. He didn't defend himself. He simply stood there, paralyzed by his own public immolation. Then she looked over at her mother-in-law's table. Genevieve Vance was watching her face, a mask of stone-cold fury. Not at her son for his betrayal, Eleanor realized, but at Eleanor for exposing it. The security guards were firm now, their professionalism overriding any sympathy. They each took one of Chloe's arms and began to escort her towards the exit. Her protests became undignified sobs. She stumbled, her red dress hiking up her thighs. The entire room watched her shame. They watched as she was led past the tables of Boston's elite. Her head bowed, the glittering diamond bracelet on her wrist seeming to mock her. It was a long, silent walk of shame. The only sound was the clicking of the guard's shoes on the marble floor, and Chloe's pathetic whimpers. As she passed the main doors and was guided out into the hotel lobby and out of sight, a sense of finality settled over the room. The show was over. Eleanor turned back to Julian. His face was ashen. His partners at the table were staring at him, their expressions a mixture of disgust and cold calculation. They weren't just seeing a cheating husband, they were seeing a liability, a man with catastrophic judgment. "I think," Eleanor said, her voice clear and carrying in the renewed silence, "that we are leaving now." She didn't wait for his reply. She turned and began to walk towards the exit. Her head held high. She could feel every eye in the room on her back. They weren't looks of pity. They were looks of awe, of respect. She had walked into the lion's den, faced the beasts, and walked out the victor. The crowd parted for her as she walked, a silent corridor of respect opening in her path. She passed Sarah, who gave her a look of profound pride. She didn't look at Genevieve. She didn't look at anyone. She just walked, her posture perfect, her emerald gown flowing behind her. She was the architect of this moment, and she had built it to perfection. Julian jolted out of his stupor, scrambled to follow her, mumbling apologies to his partners. He caught up to her in the grand lobby, grabbing her arm. "Eleanor, wait. Let me explain." She stopped and turned to face him. The fury she had kept so tightly coiled was now visible in her eyes. "Explain what, Julian? Explain how you thought you could build a second life behind my back while I was building a nursery for our son. There is nothing to explain. There is only what you have done." She pulled her arm from his grasp. "Don't touch me. Don't follow me. I will have my friend Sarah pick up some of my things tomorrow. You can speak to my lawyer on Monday." She turned and walked out of the Grand Astoria Hotel, leaving her husband standing alone amidst the wreckage of his life. The cool night air hit her face, a welcome balm. She hadn't cried. She hadn't screamed. She had simply taken a detonator to her life's foundation and blown it up on her own terms. The rebuilding could start tomorrow. The drive home in a taxi was a silent, surreal blur. The glittering lights of Boston, which had always felt like a promise, now seemed harsh and indifferent. Eleanor stared out the window, her hand resting on her belly, the hard dome a comfort, a reality in a world that had just been rendered completely false. The adrenaline that had coursed through her during the confrontation was beginning to recede, leaving behind a profound, bone-deep exhaustion. She paid the driver and walked up the stone steps to her beautiful brownstone. Their home. The word felt like a lie. She unlocked the door and stepped inside. The silence was absolute. The soft lighting she'd designed to be warm and welcoming now felt hollow, illuminating a museum of a dead marriage. Photos of them smiling on their wedding day, on a trip to Italy, at last year's gala, mocked her from the walls. She went straight upstairs to the nursery. The room was almost complete. The walls were a soft, calming gray. A handcrafted wooden crib stood against one wall, a mobile of gently spinning planets hanging above it. A comfortable rocking chair sat in the corner. This was the room she had poured all her love and hope into. This was the future. Her future. Liam's future. It was a future that no longer included Julian. The thought brought not a fresh wave of anger, but a deep, sorrowful ache. An hour later, she heard his key in the door. She heard his hesitant footsteps in the hall, then on the stairs. She didn't move from the rocking chair in the nursery. She remained still, a silent sentinel in the room dedicated to innocence. He appeared in the doorway, his tuxedo disheveled, his face pale and drawn. He looked utterly defeated. "Ellie," he began, his voice raspy. "Don't call me that," she said, her voice flat, devoid of emotion. "You've lost the right." He flinched. "Eleanor, I am so sorry. I know that's not enough. I know I've destroyed everything. It was a mistake. A stupid, horrible mistake." "A mistake." She repeated the word, tasting like poison. A mistake is forgetting to pick up milk. A mistake is taking a wrong turn. Systematically lying for months, funneling our money to another woman and planning a romantic getaway in the same hotel where you are attending a gala with your pregnant wife is not a mistake, Julian. It's a strategy, a campaign of deceit. It didn't mean anything, Chloe. She was just an escape. The pressure at work, the baby coming. I panicked. I was stupid. Eleanor finally looked at him, her eyes burning with a cold fire he had never seen before. The baby coming, you panicked because our son, the child we planned and wanted, was on his way. Is that the pathetic excuse you're going with? He had the grace to look ashamed. No, I can't explain it, but I can fix it. I'll end it with her. I'll do anything. We can go to counseling. We can save this. Save this. She let out a hollow laugh. Julian, you think this is about another woman? I could almost forgive an affair. I could understand weakness, a moment of stupidity. But it's so much more than that, isn't it? She stood up and walked towards him, her presence filling the room. The money, Julian. The $18,000 was just the tip of the iceberg, wasn't it? Where else has our money been going? His eyes widened in genuine shock, and in that moment she knew she had hit another nerve, one deeper and more rotten than simple infidelity. What are you talking about? He deflected, but his voice was unsteady. I'm an architect, Julian. I look at the whole structure, she said, her voice dropping lower. And our financial structure has some serious cracks. I pulled our statements this afternoon, not just the credit cards, our investment portfolios, our savings. There are transfers, large ones, to an LLC I've never heard of, Sterling Futures LLC. He was completely white now. That's a business venture, a side investment. An investment with Chloe Sterling, she shot back. How much, Julian? How much of our money, the money we were saving for this house for our child's future, have you funneled into a business venture with your mistress? He couldn't answer. The silence was his confession. The betrayal was deeper than she could have ever imagined. He hadn't just given her a piece of his body. He had given her a piece of their future, of their son's security. As if on cue, the silence was broken by the sharp ring of the doorbell. They both froze. Who would be here at this hour? Julian looked relieved for the interruption. I'll get it. Eleanor followed him down the stairs. He opened the door, and standing on their stoop, wrapped in a chic Burberry trench coat despite the mild evening, was his mother. Genevieve Vance swept past Julian without a word, her icy gaze landing on Eleanor. I assume he has told you that I am here to collect his things. Genevieve said, her voice dripping with venom. She wasn't here to mediate or apologize. She was here to choose a side. What? Julian looked utterly bewildered. Mother, what are you doing? I am doing what you are too weak to do yourself. Julian, she snapped, turning on him. I am ending this farce. You have humiliated the Vance name tonight, not because of your dalliance, but because you were caught. And you were caught because you married a woman with no class, no discretion, and no understanding of how our world works. She turned her full fury on Eleanor. You think you won something tonight? You think that pathetic theatrical display in front of our friends and colleagues was a victory? All you did was air our family's dirty laundry and drag our name through the mud. A proper wife would have handled this with dignity, privately. Eleanor was stunned into silence for a moment by the sheer, unmitigated audacity. A proper wife, she finally managed to say. A proper wife doesn't have to compete with a mistress her mother-in-law is championing from the sidelines. You knew. You saw her at the gala. You approved of her. Of course I knew, Genevieve sneered. Chloe Sterling is from a good family. She understands what a man like Julian needs. She is ambitious and supportive, not distracted by nesting and other domestic trivialities. She was a far more suitable choice. The cruelty of the words, especially spoken in front of the nursery door, was a physical blow. This wasn't just Julian's betrayal. This was a calculated plot, a conspiracy to replace her. "You wanted him to leave me," Eleanor whispered, the horror of it dawning on her. "For her. I wanted my son to be with a woman who could advance his station, not hold him back," Genevieve stated coldly. "The money Julian invested with her, that was my idea. A way to set them up, to give him a safety net for when he finally came to his senses and left you." Julian looked between his mother and his wife, a man utterly broken by two powerful women. "Mother, stop, please." But Genevieve was relentless. "It's a shame about the baby, of course. A loose end. But it can be managed. Now, Julian, pack a bag. You're staying with me." Eleanor stared at the woman who had just admitted to orchestrating the systematic destruction of her life and the pillaging of her family's finances. The wound wasn't just deep, it was poisoned. She had been fighting a two-front war without even knowing it. She looked at Julian, her husband, who stood by silently letting his mother speak these monstrous things. He was not just a cheat and a liar, he was a coward, utterly, irredeemably weak. And in that moment of absolute devastation, something inside Eleanor hardened for good. The sorrow was gone, burned away by a white-hot, purifying rage. This was no longer about a broken heart. It was about survival. It was about justice. "Get out!" Eleanor said, her voice low and trembling with controlled fury. "I beg your pardon?" Genevieve scoffed. "Get out of my house." Eleanor enunciated each word. She pointed at Julian. "Both of you, take what you need for one night. The rest will be sent to whatever hole you crawl into. If you are not both out of this house in 10 minutes, I will call the police and have you removed for trespassing." Genevieve looked ready to argue, but something in Eleanor's eyes, a terrifying, unbreakable resolve, made her stop. She gave a curt nod to Julian. "Fine, let's go." Eleanor stood unmoving as they hurried upstairs. She heard them gathering things, the sounds of drawers opening and closing. 10 minutes later they descended, Julian carrying an overnight bag, his eyes refusing to meet hers. Genevieve walked ahead of him, her head held high, defeated but unbowed. At the door, Julian paused, turning to her one last time. "Eleanor, "Goodbye, Julian," she said, cutting him off. She closed the solid oak door behind them, shutting them out of her life. She leaned her forehead against the cool wood, her body trembling not with sorrow but with the sheer force of her own anger. They thought they had destroyed her. They thought she was a loose end. They had no idea who they were dealing with. The architect was about to become a wrecking ball. The Monday morning after the gala felt like the dawn of a new, desolate era. Eleanor sat in the glass-walled conference room of Sarah Chen's law firm, the Boston skyline, a stark and different backdrop. The home that had been her sanctuary now felt like a mausoleum, every object a relic of a life that was a lie. Sarah had already put her in touch with the best divorce attorney in the city, a sharp, elegant woman named Olivia Morgan. Olivia listened patiently as Eleanor recounted the entire story, from the Cartier bracelet to Genevieve's venomous confession. Her face remained neutral, but her eyes were sharp, missing nothing. "The infidelity is straightforward," Olivia said when Eleanor had finished, her voice calm and authoritative. "The public humiliation at the gala gives you immense leverage. But the financial aspect, the Sterling Futures LLC, that's where we hit them hard. This isn't just infidelity, it's fraudulent conveyance of marital assets. It's a calculated financial deception." Genevieve admitted it was her idea. Eleanor added, her voice still raw. "She said it was to give him a safety net for when he left me." Olivia's eyebrows shot up. "She admitted this to you directly? Was anyone else there?" "Just Julian, and he didn't deny it. He said nothing. He just stood there, a coward." Olivia tapped her pen on a legal pad. "It's your word against theirs then. A he said she said situation. We can subpoena the bank records for the LLC, trace the funds. It will be a long, ugly fight." The Vances are a powerful family. They'll try to bury us in paperwork and bleed you dry emotionally and financially." A wave of despair washed over Eleanor. She had won the public battle, but the war ahead seemed insurmountable. She thought of her baby, of the legal fees, of the sheer energy it would take to fight a family as entrenched and ruthless as the Vances. For the first time, she felt a flicker of fear. That evening, as she was sorting through baby clothes, her phone rang. It was an unknown number. She almost ignored it, but something compelled her to answer. "Hello? Is this Eleanor Vance?" The voice was male, older, with a weary, patrician tone she didn't recognize. "Who is this?" she asked, cautious. There was a pause. "My name is Arthur Vance. I'm Julian's father." Eleanor's blood ran cold. Was he calling to threaten her to join his wife in her crusade? "What do you want?" she asked, her voice hardening. "To help you," he said simply. The words were so unexpected she was momentarily speechless. "My dear, I am so profoundly sorry for what my son and my wife have done to you. There is no excuse for their behavior. It is monstrous." "Why are you telling me this?" Eleanor asked, still suspicious. Arthur Vance was a figurehead in the family, a quiet, scholarly man who was always overshadowed by his domineering wife. Eleanor had barely exchanged more than a few pleasantries with him over the years. "Because," Arthur sighed, a lifetime of regret in the sound, "I have been a silent partner in Genevieve's ambitions for far too long. I have watched her mold our son into a man I no longer recognize, a man who values status above integrity. What she did to you, planning your replacement, stealing your future, it was the final unforgivable act. The Vance name used to stand for something. Honor, decency. She and Julian have turned it into a currency for their own greed." He paused again. "I cannot undo the pain they have caused you, but I can give you the tools to ensure they do not profit from it. I can give you justice." "What kind of tools?" Eleanor asked, her heart beginning to pound. "Meet me tomorrow, noon, the Boston Athenaeum Library. I'll be in the reading room on the 5th floor. Come alone." He hung up before she could respond. The next day, Eleanor walked into the hallowed silence of the Athenaeum, a private library that felt like a step back in time. She found Arthur Vance in a secluded corner surrounded by towering shelves of leather-bound books. He looked older than she remembered, his shoulders slumped, with a weight she was only now beginning to understand. He gestured to the chair opposite him. On the table between them was a thick leather briefcase. "Thank you for coming," he said quietly. "I wasn't sure you would." "I wasn't either," she admitted. "For 30 years, he began, his voice low, "I have allowed Genevieve to run our family and our son's life. I retreated into my books, my history. I told myself it was peaceful. But it was cowardice, the same cowardice I see in my son." He looked her directly in the eye. "You, Eleanor, are not a coward. What you did at that gala was the bravest thing I have seen in a very long time. You held a mirror up to them and they were horrified by their own reflection." He slid the briefcase across the table. "Genevieve was careless. She believes she is untouchable. Over the years, she and Julian have become involved in questionable financial practices, not just siphoning your marital assets. They have been using the Vance Family Trust, which I am the primary trustee of, as their personal slush fund, shuffling money through shell corporations, including Sterling Futures, to avoid taxes and hide risky, unsanctioned investments." He tapped the briefcase. "This contains everything. Bank statements, internal memos from Julian's computer that I accessed, correspondence between him and my wife discussing their plans, evidence of tax fraud and embezzlement that goes far beyond what they did to you. This is not just a divorce case anymore, Eleanor. This is a federal crime." Eleanor stared at the briefcase. It felt like a bomb. "Why are you giving this to me? This will destroy them. Your own son." Arthur's eyes were filled with a profound sadness. "My son destroyed himself when he chose his mother's greed over his wife and unborn child. I am not destroying him. I am simply holding him accountable. Something I should have done years ago. He sighed. This information will not only guarantee you a divorce settlement that will secure your and your son's future for life, but it will also give you the power to dismantle Genevieve's empire of influence. You can expose them, or you can use this as leverage to get exactly what you want quietly. The choice, he said, standing up, is yours. Do with it what you will. He gave her a sad, small smile. You are a good woman, Eleanor. You would have been a wonderful daughter. I wish you and my grandson a life of peace. He turned and walked away, disappearing into the labyrinth of books, leaving Eleanor alone with the weapon that could either win her war quietly or burn her enemies to the ground. She looked down at the briefcase. Her alliance had come from the most unexpected corner imaginable. This was no longer just about her. This was about dismantling a corrupt dynasty. And she had the blueprints. Eleanor walked into Olivia Morgan's office the next morning with the leather briefcase and a newfound sense of power. The exhaustion and fear had been replaced by a cold, clear-eyed resolve. As Olivia and her forensic accounting team sifted through the contents of the briefcase, their professional calm slowly turned to unconcealed shock. "My God, Eleanor," Olivia said, looking up from a particularly damning document. "This isn't just a smoking gun. This is an entire arsenal. Tax fraud, embezzlement, conspiracy. This goes far beyond family court. The SEC would have a field day with this." The strategy shifted immediately. This was no longer about a contentious divorce. It was about a controlled demolition. Olivia drafted a letter to Julian's and Genevieve's legal team. It didn't mention an affair or emotional distress. It was a cold, clinical summary of the financial crimes they had uncovered, complete with a few sample documents as proof. The letter stated Eleanor's terms. 1. Julian would agree to an uncontested divorce, ceding full sole custody of their son to Eleanor. 2. He would relinquish all claims to the Beacon Hill brownstone. 3. He would transfer 75% of all known marital assets, including his pension and stock portfolio, into a trust for their son Liam. 4. Furthermore, Genevieve Vance would personally reimburse the Vance Family Trust for every dollar she had embezzled with interest, and cede her controlling stake in several key family holdings to a trustee of Arthur's choosing. The final condition was the hammer blow. If these terms were not met within 48 hours, the entire contents of the briefcase would be delivered to the U.S. Attorney's Office and the Securities and Exchange Commission. The response was swift and panicked. The Vance's lawyer, a blustering man known for his aggressive tactics, called Olivia in a fury, accusing them of blackmail. Olivia calmly replied, "It's not blackmail, sir. It's a settlement offer. Your clients can accept it or they can prepare for a federal investigation. The choice is theirs." Checkmate. Julian and Genevieve were trapped. A public divorce was one thing. A federal prison sentence was another. They folded completely. Within 2 days, the papers were signed. Eleanor was free and she was financially secure beyond her wildest dreams. More importantly, her son's future was protected, insulated forever from the toxicity of the Vance family. Julian's fall from grace was meteoric. News of the settlement leaked within his firm. Combined with the public humiliation from the gala, his position became untenable. He was quietly forced to resign. His career in private equity finished. Chloe Sterling had been fired the Monday after the gala, her reputation in Boston's tight-knit financial community irrevocably destroyed. She disappeared, another casualty of a war she hadn't understood. Genevieve Vance was stripped of her power. Arthur, with the leverage Eleanor had given him, reasserted control over the family trust, dismantling the web of deceit his wife had spun. Genevieve was left a queen with no kingdom, her social standing shattered, confined to a life of quiet shame. 2 months later, Eleanor gave birth to a healthy, beautiful baby boy. She named him Liam Arthur Vance, a quiet tribute to the man who had given her justice. On a bright, crisp autumn afternoon, Eleanor sat in the rocking chair in the nursery holding her sleeping son. The brownstone, once a symbol of a broken dream, now felt truly hers. It was a sanctuary she had fought for and won. She looked around the room at the life she was building, a life founded not on lies but on her own strength and resilience. She had lost a husband and a life she thought she loved. But in the ashes, she had found something far more valuable: herself. She was not just a survivor of Julian Vance's betrayal. She was the architect of her own destiny. She had faced the fire and walked out, not burned but forged anew, a phoenix rising with her son in her arms, ready to build a future on a foundation of unshakable truth. The view from here was clear. The sight lines were open, and the structure was sound. It was a life built to last. Eleanor's story is a powerful, gut-wrenching reminder that sometimes the people closest to us are capable of the deepest betrayal. It's a story about how a foundation of lies can never support a life, and how true strength is often forged in the most devastating fires. She didn't just get mad, she got smart. She used her intelligence, her courage, and an unexpected alliance to reclaim not just her life, but her power. What do you think of Eleanor's incredible journey from heartbreak to triumph? Could you have been as calm and calculated as she was at that gala? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one. If this story resonated with you, please give this video a like and share it with someone who might need to hear a story of strength and resilience. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you won't miss our next real-life drama. Thank you for listening.